Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Beyond the Evidence, the podcast where we dive deep into true crime cases, uncovering the facts and exploring the unanswered questions that keep us coming back for more. I'm your host, Marv, and I want to thank you for joining me today. If you haven't already, please subscribe to my YouTube channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. And if you'd like to support the channel, you can find links to my PayPal and Cash App in the description. Now, let's get into today's topic.
In the shadows, where the truth lies, Marv's on the case, with justice in her eyes. Unsolved mysteries, voices lost in time. She digs deeper, uncovering the crime. Beyond the evidence, she'll fight the fight. Beyond the evidence, where justice matters. Marv's the voice for the voiceless, breaking all the patterns, facts and theories, clues and controversy. Join the journey, uncovering the mystery. This is Beyond the Evidence, where justice prevails, with Marv leading the way. Truth never fails. Now get ready for this live stream. Super chat, highlight your message. Don't fall victim to the irrelevance. Hit that like, share, subscribe to Marv's Beyond the Evidence.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me again. Bossy will be here in a little bit. I'm a little worked up. I can tell you that right now. So I'm trying to calm myself down. I've been reading some comments from Flint's family to the McClerkin family. I don't agree with them at all and what's being said. This family is re-victimized all over again. The Smiths and the McClerkins. They're going to have to go through the stages of grief all over again for Karena, okay? And Flint's sister going on Jerry's page and making comments like, let it go, is ridiculous. It's only been one day since the verdict. Let them go through the stages. And then to say that Jerry's threatening them, no, Jerry's just hoping that Flint gets some time from these obstruction charges and gets some kind of justice for her granddaughter. Okay? And I specifically put this on Tot's page. Just because the jury acquitted does not mean that Karena died of an overdose. What it means is that we don't know how she died because she was secretly buried for 6 years in a shallow grave, and the bones couldn't tell us what happened because they were too degraded. There was no soft tissue. There was no blood for toxicology. And I proceeded to tell her that originally 6 of the jurors wanted to find him guilty. So, with that being said, I'm going to try to calm down. And Bossy and I are going to go through the testimony that was missed from Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. Bossy, I'm fired up, girl.
Hi, Marv, and I wish I had heard that. I was taking my dogs out for a quick bathroom break, but um, I'm fired up too, so I'll just leave it at that. I'm sure that anything and everything that you said, I would agree with.
Yeah, I'll fill you in later.
Other than that, did you get yourself rested up a little bit? I feel like I can think a little bit more clearly today, at least.
I did. I slept probably almost 12 hours.
Oh, nice. I'm jealous of that for sure,
I
but
slept 10 hours for sure. I know that.
oh, well, that's good. You definitely needed it.
Yeah. So today we're going over the trial testimony from Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday in more detail, as I have done in the past, as we have done in the past. Now, Monday, I was in court all day. I know I have my notes. Tuesday, I wasn't, but you have your notes. Wednesday, I showed up late because I arrived in Kokomo at 4, but you have notes from that also. So we're
Yeah,
gonna
between the two of us, we have all the days covered.
right. So we're gonna go through those. I'm gonna tell you exactly what. Well, I can't say exactly what was said. We did our best to take as many notes as we could. Like I said, when you're covering a trial, you're trying to write down as much pertinent information as you can.
There's also a lot of repetitive information, so
Yes, definitely. So we're gonna get started on from what the testimony that happened on Monday. I can tell you that Monday we were advised that one of the jurors had suffered an injury on Friday, somehow at the courthouse, and that she would not be returning. I just want to say to that juror, I hope that you're healing and recovering. And I'm so sorry that you got hurt at the courthouse. If you were walking down those stairs, I know how it can happen. Those stairs are treacherous. So we wish you the best and full recovery quickly. Sending you good vibes and thoughts.
absolutely. And thank you for your time that you did serve on the jury.
Exactly. Okay. So the first person that came and testified on Monday, his name is John Boyer. And he is the coroner for Miami County. Said he's been doing it for 7 years. His role is to investigate death and decide cause and manner of death. He's done over 700 autopsies. He said that he did bring in Dr. Wolf, who did the actual autopsy 3 days after Karena was found. He was called by the state police, the CSI, to help, and Mr. Boyer did go out to the scene where they found Karena's remains. He said she had been buried for years. She was skeletonized, and where the skin would have been was a gray, waxy substance. He said that she was in all of her clothing, was all in one piece. Anything that you can remember, Bossy, before I start talking about the death certificate?
Nope, we're on the same page so far.
Okay. He said the death certificate was filled out. It was put in the 2021 death registry. He said the funeral home inserts a bunch of information for them in the beginning, like name, address, occupation, things like that. And then he's got to fill out the cause of death, the manner of death. They did provide states 26, which was the death certificate. The cause of death was undetermined. He said when you have a complete fresh body with fluids and blood in the body, they can look and tell what the manner of death was. But because she had been buried for years and in poor conditions, they couldn't determine her time of death, her cause of death, her manner of death.
Yeah, basically because she was skeletonized, they could not do a toxology report on her. So they were unable to test for any drugs, any toxins, anything like that, that would help them determine whether it was a natural or unnatural cause of death,
Right.
anything like that.
Yeah, he said he wouldn't be able to test for an overdose because all of that had seeped into the ground. Now, I just want to say that yes, all the fluids seeped into the ground, but Bossy and I do know some former police officers, and we got to thank Ruckus for talking to us last night, giving us some insight, on how and why this happened. But he did say that him and Steve from True Crime Web are working to put together a training for police officers, for forensics individuals such as coroners and pathologists, to be able to take that dirt from underneath the body and the roots from the trees or vegetation and test that.
Well, and also it based on the water runoff.
Right.
Well, that's kind of another part of it too, but it's very interesting what he explained to us, and I wish them the best of luck in their endeavors and to keep us updated on that, whether you can or not. But I really hope that this comes through for them, because I know that they have some Mr. Steve has some good tools to his advantage, some backing, and that makes a lot of difference sometimes, and it'll make a huge difference in recovery of, for example, here's an example that Ruckus gave, and I'm sorry, Ruckus, if we're talking out of turn here, you can blame me. If, for example, there's been the example he gave us is people have had family members known who killed their family members, but they never had a body recovered yet. So based off of a water runoff, they can do soil samples in the way that the water runs off and lays on certain lands. It's going to help them specifically, hopefully, in finding and recovering the remains of individuals whose family members still have not been recovered.
Right. And we wish them the best of luck in getting that implemented throughout the United States, because it is going to be a wonderful tool for law enforcement and the forensic community. Mr. Boyer, going back to testimony, Mr. Boyer said that the body was sealed in a body bag and it was x-rayed right in the bag. And they were looking for anything and everything, meaning bullets, fibers, anything they could find besides bones, vegetation, and roots. He said nothing concrete was found. There was a widening to the vertebrae, and that the radiologist had said there was a widening to the vertebrae, and then there was an objection, and it was sustained. Then it was the defense's turn. Defense said, "You're an elected official, not a physician, correct?" And he said yes. He had been the coroner for 7 years, and they said, "You're not a doctor or pathologist." And he said correct, and they're like, "You had to hire a pathologist when needed," and he said yes. He said he can make the determination to the cause of a death. But they have to defend that. So basically, the coroner can come to a conclusion of cause of death, but they have to really document why that is, and defend their determination. That is why Dr. Wolf was hired, because he is actually a pathologist, and he is the one that made the determination. Anything else in your notes about that, Bossy?
No, we're still on the same page.
Okay, wonderful. So then the prosecution re-questioned him. He said, Boyer said they dug her out of a shallow grave encased in a ball of roots, dirt, and mud, and she was in a trash bag. They lifted her out in one piece, and they put her in the sealed body bag. They took x-rays, then they took her to the morgue. She was then transported to Howard County Coroners, and she was taken to Indianapolis to an anthropologist. They had her look over Karena and then released her to the funeral home. That she's put in a secured location, and during all of these transports, the chain of evidence was followed, and everything had been locked down so that they did have a chain of evidence. He said when it comes to a shallow grave, the type of soil matters. The topsoil has a lot of access to oxygen, and the body and the bones can deteriorate faster. He says, now when you're normally buried, you're put 6 feet down, and that is in the clay, and that clay seals around the casket or the body, and the body lasts longer because it doesn't have access to so much oxygen. He said the process of digging, that they did take dirt with them. They try not to manipulate the roots that held her together. They tried to get everything, her, the bags, and the root system, and the dirt, and keep it together and put in the bag. He says that when a person is buried, and not in the proper way, meaning just buried and not in a casket, not 6 feet down, that the soil sinks after burying, and it creates like a divot in the ground. He said they started digging at 9 a.m. and they found her at 2 p.m. He said that this was his first dig. A lot of care was taken. The state CSI and team was there, and the Kokomo detectives. So he said altogether there was about 4 or 5 people there when they dug and located her remains. Bossy, anything that I missed in that section?
No, you're doing great, Marv.
Okay. Defense came back up. Now, this was very common in this trial where prosecution would ask questions, the defense would ask questions, then the prosecution, then the defense. I mean, they went back and forth several times. So the defense said, asked about the root system and cutting around it, and asked if that root system had grown up throughout her body. And Mr. Boyer did say that it had, and it had become part of her. They had asked about soft tissue, and he said some skin, but mostly the gray wax. And he did mention that the skin, the very little skin that was left, was on her stomach. So he said they took her to the anthropologist for human identification, and they hired her for specifically to look for trauma. I have no pre-mortem injuries. So what he's saying is that after she had looked for trauma, there was nothing, there were no injuries that they could find. The defense asked him about the date on the death certificate because the date on the death certificate shows April of 2025. Mr. Boyer explained they wanted to know why it wasn't completed earlier. And Mr. Boyer explained it was on hold and they wait as long as they need to so that they can have all the information. So since Flint was going on trial, they completed it in April of 2025, knowing that they wouldn't be getting any more information that could be added to the death certificate. And actually, the prosecutor went on and asked him about this, and that's when he said they wait till they have all the evidence. And since the trial is happening, no more evidence is provided. So therefore, they completed the death certificate. Did I miss anything in that, Bossy?
No,
Okay, I'm doing good. Woohoo!
you're always doing great.
It's difficult, you guys. It really is. The second person to testify was Darian Wolf. He is the forensic pathologist. He gave his background and schooling. I did not write all that down. He said in 2016 he began working as a pathologist, that he was contacted by Miami and Howard County and brought to Howard County on July 22nd, 2022. He said that He starts out by taking photos of the external, then the internal, and he does his examination that once those photos were done is when they started taking things out of the body bag and recovering the bones from the dirt, the mud, and the encasement. He's looking and collecting the bones and looking for any trace evidence, such as earrings, any jewelry, any bracelets, anything that she could have had on her at the time. Then the state gave him, or they put in states 28 A through Q. Now, these were all pictures of the sealed body bag, the tag, him opening the body bag, the body as it was received.
The yellow backboard was one of them because
Yes.
when they recovered her body, they just basically put it on like one of the yellow backboards so that way they could keep it as intact as possible during transport.
Right. They had a picture of the buckle that helped keep everything in place. They had, now we didn't get to see these pictures. This is just what he is describing. He's describing the bracelets that they found. Another picture was a closer picture of those bracelets. There was a tag inside of the clothing. The fabric that was found with the clothes. There was a picture of a close-up of the muddy material and bone. He said there was another picture and it was pink and black on the abdominal. And I think it says moved ring. And then K was a picture of that ring. A picture of them removing the plastic bags, the plastic body, and getting the bones and the bracelet out. He said there was some small bones in the hands and feet that they had found and took a picture of. Anything else that you have with those pictures?
No, you're doing great.
Okay. He said the goal is to determine the cause of death, the specific reason of death, and matter. So he said there was 5 categories: accidental, homicide, suicide, undetermined, and what was the 5th one?
Natural.
Natural, that's right. So he said the manner of death, you can't just find it on your findings, what you found on the body. You have to look at everything, their medical records, their history, and all sorts of other types of information. He says if everything is right there, within 4 hours after death, they can determine the cause of death. If it's not right there and they don't have these things, it's hard to determine that cause of death. He says the humidity temperature can affect this. And that they have been able to find the cause of death in 7 days. The cause of death drops over time. And since Karena was buried for over 6 years, that is what happened in the situation. Anything that I missed there?
I'm not sure if you had covered this, but I kind of wrote this down. I said that he said that the manner of death needs circumstances, like the medical, the toxology report, and you can go based on witness accounts.
Yes.
That you're very limited based on the time of death. And like you said, extended post-mortem. I wrote down extended post-mortem interval, which means like that's from the time that the person has died until you have a chance to examine that body.
Correct.
That limits it. And the longer the time goes, you have to take more of the circumstances into account
Right.
of what you can use to determine the cause of death.
Right. Exactly. From there, there was State's Exhibit 29, the autopsy findings. They looked at the history and the excavation. They looked at a summary when she was last heard from. The fact that her body had not been found for 2,107 days. They take into consideration what the body looked like. And that it was a skeleton encased in roots and dirt. They looked for trauma, bullets, knife marks, anything they could find, and nothing was found. Oh, thank you. There was on the CT scan, there was a widening of the vertebrae, which normally shows a tear of ligament, which could be due to a blow to the back of the neck or someone dropping her on her head. They look at police reports, medical records, and all other info. Anthropology looked at the hyoid bone. And this is where they said they're not fused. It's all cartilage. And as you become older, it turns into bone. The cartilage solidifies and turns into bone. He talked about radiology. They're trained to read the scans. He said that didn't mean a lot to him. That the fact that they commented on the ligament, that there's no ligament, no soft tissue found on the bones. He said the widening of the bones, possible cause indicates a snap and trauma. There was a space, and it could have been from the roots growing through her and spreading the bones. So basically what he's telling the jury is that it could have been two things, okay? One, she could have had a blow to the back of her neck or dropped that caused her to hit the back of her neck, or this widening in her bones that they could see was from all the vegetation that had been growing up through her caused that. He said that she was not well intact and that there was nothing there that was going to hold her together because of the ligament decay. The bones fell apart.
And this is in specific reference to the bones along her spine and back of her neck, correct?
Correct. So what he described is when somebody's alive and they've got all their ligaments and everything, there's a strap that runs from the back of your neck all the way down to your spine, all the way down your spine. And it's considered, this is ligaments that hold your spine and your neck together. But because she had been buried, all this ligaments and any soft tissue around her neck had disappeared. It eroded because she was only buried in 4 feet of soil. And like I said, that means the body erodes faster. Said that radiology did find a positive finding that something was abnormal. But when they looked at the external exam, the soft tissue was gone. There were a few pieces of hair. Now, guys, this is going to be kind of gross, okay? So, trigger warning right here. Describing this stuff is not fun for us. But we want the audience to realize what happened to her, okay? So, soft tissue was gone, few strands of hair. Her eyes were gone. Her teeth were in good condition. There was findings with the body. They assigned an identity. They had piercings, fabric, bracelets, and the tag on the clothing. He said the skeleton had 1 piercing. There was some bracelets, and I said clothing, still with the bones. Because of the decomposition.
Here, I'll explain this part if you
Yeah.
want. Give you a break for a moment. It can be taxing having to do it all. I understand. So basically, and Marv takes much better notes than me. But the fatty tissue that's on your body when it decompes due to the fatty acid, it creates like a gray waxy substance, and this is this gray matter, gray waxy substance that they're referring for. And they also found 1 insect, which he believed was insignificant.
Yeah.
That I wrote down one of a kind, not that she was not buried in a casket, that the roots held up her bones like on a scaffolding.
Mm-hmm.
And then I wrote a Dr. Latham did a head and neck assessment.
Yep.
And then there was no tissue to determine if, for example, strangulation occurred. They showed photos of her skull. And Marv, if you want to take back over, you want to add anything, please interrupt me because you do take much better detailed notes than I do. On her skull, they noted that there were no fractures of the skull or on her face or teeth. On her neck, there was only the partial hyoid bone.
Yeah, it's important to note that normally, if a body's found right away, they look at the head and the neck in depth because because her eyes weren't there, they couldn't find the petechiae. And when they're looking for these, it's little red dots, and it can indicate strangulation or asphyxiation. But he said that, and I hope you remember this part, Bossy, he said that no one can just look at a body and see this stuff.
Right.
It's very small. You have to be trained. It can be found under the eyelids in areas that normal people wouldn't notice or look for it.
It's like a pinpoint sized red dot. Like
Yeah.
it has to be done under close examination. And not to go back, this is just a short thing, but I did note that he had said in the living, if he was able to examine it earlier in the living, it would indicate trauma, but he's having to do everything on artifactual findings.
Yes.
It's important to keep in mind.
Right.
Yeah.
There was no nose.
And on the petechia, he said it does how long that has a lot of variables to it too. Like he said by 10 days, he said maybe by even 7 days, they would have lost the ability to make a diagnosis. So basically what I took away from that was unless they had found her body within a week, anytime after that, they probably still would not have been able to make a positive cause of death under just in that one aspect.
Right. So once again, he said there was no nose because your nose is made out of cartilage. Teeth were in good condition. There was no fractures, no bullet holes. The brain and the spinal cord were gone. The neck, normally what they would look for is hemorrhages in the blood vessels. That wasn't there, so they couldn't determine any of that. They
And
saw
this
the
I'm
partial
sorry.
hyoid bone.
And with that petechia, he said, like I said, as a pinpoint type, he said it's basically caused by a rapid change in your blood vessels.
Yes.
Like imagine like a blocked pipe. And so that's what causes that to occur.
And they just burst, and that's what causes the little red dot. So he did say that in young adults, the hyoid bone is going to have a lot of cartilage, and that some of this decomposed, and so they can't determine if anything with that was manipulated or fractured or broken. So she was found deceased, not identifiable after 10 days. And you would not see these findings. 7 to 10 days, the skin changes. And once again, he reiterated that this had been 2,107 days, and all evidence was gone. Once again, he talked about the skin on the neck, the blood vessels being gone, that is when they look for strangulation. Can be more obvious in the hemorrhages in the neck and can be seen up to 14 days. He said blood leaks out of the vessels, becomes more difficult each day after this 14 days. And he said no injuries that they saw on the CT scan. Once again mentioned they didn't find any bullets, knife marks. None were found. He said so what they do is they take each bone that they find in the body bag and they have a white sheet that's laid out next to them. And they lay each bone out in the order to make the individual again. And they examine each bone, and that the anthropologist looked at it more carefully. Let's see. I have types of injuries such as strangulation would not leave evidence behind. Hanging,
So
suffocation, head lock,
he had
artificial
asked,
death.
they had asked what type of evidence
That's right.
shows, what type of evidence deteriorates that would help you in determining a cause of death, I believe.
Yep.
Because I wrote evidence that deteriorates is something like if you couldn't tell if they were suffocated, asphyxiated, carbon monoxide poisoning, a neck
Right.
compression, a headlock, stuff like that.
Yeah, and he did say that, the compulsion of the blood vessels is restricting oxygen to the brain.
And it is a lot of information, and by no means am I an expert in anything. That's not why I go to these things. I've said that before. So, and I do just take notes to help anyone that's there because it's a lot to write down.
Yeah, and I put on here, it does take less pressure for the vulgula veins, meaning some veins in your neck, doesn't take great amount of strength. Couple of minutes struggling. It'll take a couple of minutes longer if the victim is struggling. So he's talking about if she was strangled or the neck was broken or something like that, and how that would affect it. They did say that in a lot of cases with strangulation, the hyoid bone isn't broken. And I found that to be odd, that they go with the hemorrhaging and the petechiae and looking at that to determine strangulation or asphyxiation more than looking at the hyoid bone. That I did not know. So then they started talking about foam around the mouth or the nose. And he says foam around the mouth or the nose is because your heart is slowing. Fluids go into the lungs and forms foam. Now, this is non-specific, and they've had foam come out and they can't say how they died. He said anything can cause it. There's a misperception for just overdoses. He says he can see it, but the foam can be due to other causes of death, such as pulmonary embolism, drowning, strangulation, pulmonary edema, meaning something was done with that neck area. So he says you can see the white foam in all kinds of ways that an individual could die. It's not just from overdose. And that is because the defense kept saying that because this white foam was around her mouth, that indicated she died of an overdose.
Yes, he said that when the fluid in the blood backs up into the lungs, it mixes with air that creates the foam that then goes back through your airway. And that's how the foam is created. And so
Right.
and how it's not always indicative of an overdose.
Yep. He says the date of death couldn't be determined, but that they went with the October 11th through the October 13th. And that October 11th was the last time that she had been seen. They said, as far as cause of death, they're unable to ascertain this. There was no soft tissue or fluid. Bones do not have signs of trauma. And that is why it was put as undetermined also. Anatomical cause of death. Usually they're looking for gunshots, knife wounds, that type of thing. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, I was just going to say he was saying that there was no anatomical cause, but there could be a physical cause or a natural cause.
Yep. He hoped to find evidence, but because it had been over 2,100 days, it's going to drastically hamper things. Because there's no soft tissue, this dramatically alters the cause of death. He knows that there was drug use, but he has no evidence of an overdose because he couldn't do any toxicology tests because all the fluids had drained out. He said if taken to the hospital, 95% cause of death could have been determined. So if Karena had died of an overdose and Flint woke up that morning and found her, if he had taken her to the hospital or called police right away, there's a 95% chance that he could have determined that the cause of death was an overdose. But because that didn't happen,
I don't understand how if he just woke up, he knew instantly she was dead. So
right.
I'm just throwing that in there.
And so he said the manner is undetermined because, and he did say, even though the manner is undetermined, in his opinion, the burial indicates foul play. The secret burial outside of a coffin, meaning she was not buried in the proper way. Talked about homicide. He can't just call it homicide because she was buried. He was taught if there's no cause of death, he doesn't put a manner of death, meaning homicide, natural, whatever. That is, he was taught to put it as undetermined. But he can't rule out homicide. And he can't rule out overdose. He said the body may be injured in such a case due to the long postmortem. Homicides can be strangulation, asphyxiation. He said it could be homicide or it may not be homicide. He said 95 to 98% within several days, they can look at the tissues, the toxicology to make a determination. Most cases you will find cause of death in 23-year-olds. But I think he meant to say 18. Anything you have, Bossy, that I missed?
No, honey, you're doing great. This was a lot of information to take in.
I
And
have
they
pages
do,
and pages and
yes.
pages just
And
on
they,
this.
and because the witnesses are familiar in their field, they just talk naturally, so they're talking and having a conversation kind of just like we're talking now. So imagine if you were just trying to talk and write down everything I'm saying right now. Like, I know you guys are already behind.
Yeah. Hey, Andrea, good to see you. Glad you're home. Ella says, my son had petechiae. It was from jumping on a trampoline and holding his breath. So it burst the blood vessels. Yeah. Hello to everybody just coming in. Troublemaker says, and you can blame Flint and Brad and Alicia Wheeler for that. The Wheelers are just as much to blame for not calling 911 even days later. I agree. And that they're accomplices to this all. Okay. So then the defense came up and they got to ask their questions. And he said, so she was entirely devoid of soft tissue. And the witness says, no, she was mainly devoid of soft tissue. There was one little patch on her stomach. And they said, and she was encased in vegetation. And there was anatomical changes because of this. And he said, yes, could cause spacing in bones. Then I have longitude ligament, Dr. Parker, but I didn't write anything else for that. Do you have anything?
Recalling my notes or bringing it back to my recollection, this was a lot of where they were going back and forth, objecting.
That's right.
So it was like they would say something and then they would have a sidebar and then they'd come back and they would just move on. So it's like we were hearing bits and pieces. And that also makes it really hard to keep up with. And this is on the redirect, correct?
No, this is for the defense when they first started questioning.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, so they had.
Because I then have examined. They asked him, "Did you examine every bone?" And he said, "Yes. No fractures. There was no fractures in the facial bones or the skull." And he said, "No." And then they asked him, there's only a partial hyoid bone, which is U-shaped. Were there any fractures in that? And he said, no fractures. Trunk of body, chest, abdominal, pelvic, was all looked at.
Yeah, and I have this he couldn't determine if it was fractured or not.
Right.
And like we mentioned earlier, there's a lot of repetitiveness to questions and So sometimes I feel like I'm on the wrong page, and then I'll read a few sentences down. I'm like, nope, I'm still right along with her. So
then they asked him, was there any fractures of the ribs? No. Was there any fractures of the extremities? No. The ligaments were fully decayed. And they asked him, there's no muscles, tendons, blood vessels recovered, no fluid recovered, and he said no. He says you need blood to test for drugs. If fluids are available, then you could test for that. And then they said, so you can't rule out that it was for an overdose. And he said, no, I cannot rule that out. Then they were talking, the defense was asking about a shallow versus a deep burial. And he said, there's a difference. The shallow ground, with shallow graves, there's groundwater, animals, it can freeze and thaw, and this can alter the distance of the bones. And then once again, the defense says, so there was no bullets, no knife tips, none of that. And he said, no ligaments found to hold spine together. No non-specific traumatic event was shown. Then they talked about this posterior longitudinal ligament could be injured if falling off a bike. And that's so what the posterior longitudinal ligament is the strap that I'm talking about that goes from your neck all the way to your spine. He says, yeah, if you fall off your bike and you hit your head, that can get damaged and show injury. But not just from dropping somebody on the floor. You actually have to have something go into that to show the injury. He said if you were dropped from 4 to 5 feet, it could happen if doesn't hit flat surface, meaning if somebody's dropped, what the defense was trying to say is if she was dropped into the hole where she was buried, could this cause the injury? And he said, no, not unless her neck hit something or something landed on something such as a huge rock to cause the injury. He says, intrusions, you have to fall on something or get hit with an object to have these injuries, not a flat surface. And then they asked, because of the lack of soft tissue, you couldn't determine the color of skin, height, and weight. And he said, correct. But the teeth were in good condition. That there was no spinal fractures, no fractures in the leg bones, all the way to the pelvis. And then they asked about abuse of drugs. He said it wouldn't have mattered, can die from reasons other than drugs. There was no soft tissue or fluids to determine drug use, but he can't rule it out. He said if we had fluids and soft tissue, they could have made a determination. Once again, they hit on, but it's undetermined, and you cannot rule out some manners of death. And he said, correct. Because she was buried secretly, they can't say overdose was the reason she died, but he did say that those that are brought to the ER or placed somewhere to be found Those are the types of dumping that takes place when individuals are doing drugs and overdose. They don't get secretly, he said they're never seen one secretly buried. And he kept hitting on that point to the jury. Overdoses happen. They find people all over the place, and some of them they can save, some of them they can't. But in this manner, in this situation, and in all the situations of overdoses that they've seen, they've never seen somebody secretly buried until Karena.
And he also said that he couldn't rule out if it was a homicide either. He could not rule out whether it was and that was a very big point. Like, in the beginning that I took away, because he listed the 5 manner of deaths that he could put on her on her death certificate. And it was, and he did say that some do put it as
homicide.
He said
because she was secretly buried.
Correct. But him, and he wants to have to be able to back it up with that evidence, is why he said undetermined.
Yep. He did say that the types and quantities of drugs would not change the cause of death or manner. I didn't quite understand that. Can't comment on something he can't access. Oh. So because they didn't have anything to test, he can't comment on what the drugs may have been or may not have been. Then they talked about the strangulation, the petechiae, the evidence of the pinpoint hemorrhage, rapidly increases in pressure, it goes up in bursts, visible to human eye, whites of eyes. They look at the orbits, the gums, the cheeks, anywhere on the face for these petechiae. They said, well, what if somebody was looking peacefully asleep? No one said diagnose except forensic pathologists. Dark complexion will make it harder to see the petechiae. Only professionals can diagnose this. So, what they were talking about is if a witness saw her sleeping peacefully, wouldn't that mean that she died of an overdose instead of something else? And that's where he was saying no, because those who are trained know to look in these other areas for the petechiae. Just a random person wouldn't see that. And only professionals can diagnose that. Anything else on that, Bossy?
No, Marv, you're doing great.
Okay. The prosecutor came back and was talking about being dropped from 4 to 5 feet, not a scientific traumatic event. He had the doctor specify that being buried secretly, it's impossible to drop a body. It's impossible to just drop a body in a grave on the floor. It would have to force a rupture in the neck or the back. And that's where we were talking about that strap. So he was reiterating to the jury that just because somebody's dropped 4 to 5 feet doesn't mean that it's going to show an injury because they were dropped. That it would have to have some kind of force to rupture that ligament in the back of the neck. He said, like hitting the edge of a table, that would cause a rupture, not just dropping something on the floor. It would have to have significant force to produce that injury to rupture the ligament of the spine or neck. He said a punch to the back of the head, it's got force, so it may show. Once again, unable to rule out overdose or strangulation. He got the pathologist to admit that the secret burial is not a reasonable thing that goes with overdoses. The more reasonable reason for a secret burial would be foul play, like strangulation or asphyxia. The defense came back on, and they're like, you don't want to guess or speculate. Could be lots of causes or manners. And you have excluded some. And they asked him, you don't have any witness testimony? And he said, no, it is helpful to have identification of the body. Yes. That they could have had notes of the body before the decomp if she had been found earlier or the police had been called. Then he said, would not have trust to anyone who says no neck injury or what in the heck is this say? Says no neck injury or absence of body, and he sees body, and they are wrong.
I think that's when they were talking about, again, if someone looks in and just sees the person, he was saying you can't just look at somebody and tell an absolute cause of death,
right,
without someone who is capable of performing that diagnosis, that's certified to do it.
Yeah. And then the defense said, well, if you had been given other information, would you have put it in the report? And he said, absolutely. And then there was other theories due to the widening. And they objected, question and answered already. This is where we got into another objection phase. I have objection sustained, objection asked and answered, sustained, objection, rephrase. So,
and there was a lot of that on, but only during, like, I felt like certain parts of the trial. It was like certain things that the defense really just didn't want coming out. I don't know if it's the right word to say or not, or maybe it's not that they didn't want coming out. And I can say this for the prosecution too. A lot of it was phrasing of their questions.
Yes, and the next one was the state of Indiana just wants you to focus on the radiology report. Objection. There was small pieces of info that you could have used or not used to get a manner of death. Then it goes back to talking about the drugs that are lethal, that fentanyl. And he says, is fentanyl lethal? And he said, yes. What about the H and the press Xanax? Fentanyl again, objection. Fentanyl can lead to overdose in small amounts. Yes. unable to rule out homicide or overdose, but less likely to the overdose would be less likely due to the secret burial. He didn't like that answer. He said they wanted to know if human factors can react differently, meaning different people looking at different things. The prosecutor came back up and just asked one question. And I put, his answer was that they have never discovered an overdose death with this type of burial.
The question was, in your history of all the cases that you have, examined and studied, how many of them were that were overdoses? How many of them were a serotypus? I think that's how you say it.
Yeah.
A secret burial.
Right.
And his answer was none.
Right.
None with an overdose. Let me specifically say that he's never seen a case where there was an overdose and they went and secretly hid the body. Never.
Right. And we do want to say that after all this testimony, we learned that in 2016, there was only 2 deaths for fentanyl. And the defense wanted to make it sound like fentanyl was huge here and people were dying right and left at the time that Karena died, and that just wasn't true.
No, and correct me if I'm wrong, and I believe only 6 of them, there were 6 deaths from H.
Yes. Yes.
So combined, and that's still a high number. Oh, I wish it were 0. But in 2016, there were, between H and the Fenty, there was only a total of what? 8?
Yeah. And I was also told that the pressed Xanax that the defense really hit on and tried to make prevalent, that people were dying from this pressed Xanax, didn't really come into Kokomo until late 2016. So it wasn't as prevalent as the defense was making it out to be. Bossy, can you kind of talk to them during this time of when this testimony was going on? What the jury was, what they look like, what Flint looked like? I need to use the bathroom.
Sure, no problem.
Thank you.
And I can also have chat open, so if anyone has any questions, then I can read it in chat and be able to answer that now too, in case you have any questions up until this point. I felt like the jury was very attentive. They were taking notes during this part. Flint seemed like he was, like any defendant would be, as this information is coming out, you're going to be saying something to your lawyers and stuff and wanting to make sure you're contributing your part to the conversation. So, Troublemaker said pressed Xanax wasn't around in that time. Correct, Marv? And I think it had just come to the Kokomo area at that time, and I will ask Marv when she comes back. But I believe that's why we got those stats that there was only 2 deaths that year due to the pressed Xanax coming into Kokomo. I think it had something to do with it just wasn't around prior to that. I don't know very much about that scene, so I apologize. I know Marv probably doesn't either, so I'm like the worst person to speak on that. So I apologize, Trouble. But yes, you're right. At the end of 2016, and Karena went missing in October, so it's not like it was something that is. And I think Trouble's bringing that up because unfortunately, that's an epidemic that is not only Kokomo and Indiana facing, it's an epidemic that our country is facing. So, just to touch on that real quick, it's never today's a great day to start your sobriety. And if you ever stumble along the way, that day is still a great day to regain your strength. So to anyone who's struggling, please don't give up hope. It's important. So let's see, Luis, this is heartbreaking. Hope Marvin, Bossy, hope you're in better spirits today. Louise says her heart goes out to the families, and we appreciate you, Louise. And absolutely, I mean, and anything that we're feeling today, that's small potatoes compared to what the family feels, what their journey and struggle has been over the past 9 years. And I just ask anyone extend them some sympathy. I mean, put yourself in their shoes. That's kind of, like I said, why I do this, because if I were in their shoes, I would want someone to care. It's a tough situation, and my heart definitely goes out to them as well. We have Mustang in the chat as well, and Witchy Widow, and Fishy is in here. We do thank you all for coming in. I know Marv definitely does. She appreciates you. Without your support, her channel, it would just be her and I talking to each other, or her talking to herself, because I can't always be here. Are there any other questions in the chat? And I'm trying to keep my spirits up. It's tough when you live in the community or surrounding communities within close proximity, knowing what has happened. And also take this time to encourage anyone to become active in your own communities. There's tragedy all over the world, and lots of families that still could probably use some love and support. So reach out, see what you can do to make a difference in your community. I know it would be appreciated. And even if you don't, feel comfortable enough doing that, spreading awareness on social media goes such a long way. And like I've also do, just spread it word of mouth to your family and friends, or if a stranger strikes up a conversation with you, take 5 seconds and to say, hey, did you know about this in our local community that's going on? And that person might tell another person, and then more eyes and awareness will be directed to those cases. So I'm so glad you're back, Marv.
Yeah, thank you for that. Great question. Why is Vincent Farmer on Facebook saying she died of an overdose when her cause of death was unknown? Okay, so in order for, how do I say this? In order for his family to understand this and go on, they have to believe that she died of an overdose. Not that his father could have done something to her.
And on something like I was just speaking on, put yourself in that position.
Right.
What if that was, someone that you loved and believed and trusted in, and that it was your parent. So, and we all
believe the bad in him. He knows his father has an addiction, but to do something like that to a young girl.
And all of us have been in the true crime community long enough to know that we've seen instances of SK cases where, like, their family members had no idea what their loved one was out doing, harming others. So sometimes people are different with different people.
Right.
So just show compassion on both sides, unless they were, directly involved somehow, as far as spreading false narratives or something like that. Just his kids had nothing to do with this. That's my stance on this. His
Well-
children had nothing to do with this.
And they see the acquittal, the not guilty, as she overdosed. They're not seeing it as there just wasn't enough proof of murder. You know, in their minds, it wasn't a murder, because the jury acquitted them, they agreed it was an overdose. That's not the case at all. That juror that's been speaking out said there just wasn't enough evidence to show what happened to her and if anybody did anything, because of the undetermined cause of death and manner of death. That is what the jury got hung up on.
And if he had put homicide and not undetermined, he would have had to back up his findings with that. And he could not do that based off of a forensic skeletal remains. I mean, it's just impossible. You cannot test bones. You cannot do you can't do a tox screen on bones.
Yep. Okay, so let's get into Dr. Krista Latham's testimony. She was the pathologist. She went to the University of Indiana in 2007. She is a professor. And she works with the director of the Indiana Identification Center. She's done a lot of research. She's done a lot of work on the skeletal level. She has published textbooks about the age of skeletons and many other topics on skeletons. She gives lectures on this and has done over 200 of them. She works with law enforcement, other coroners, pathologists, other anthropologists, things like that. She said a forensic anthropologist specializes in skeletons and makes identifications. She was contacted by the Miami coroner. They wanted her to look at the bones for any trauma, look for any injuries during her lifetime or at the time of death. She does not do cause or manner of death. And she said that things in the environment can affect the bones. She said in July of 2022, she took the bones. She had the majority of the skeleton. They showed states 30 and 31, which was a PowerPoint. This is where she showed the skull. She showed the skeleton or the spine. She said the missing hyoid, the zoiphoid process, is just above the sternum. So your sternum is here. Then you would have your hyoid bone. She said there was one section of the hyoid that was missing. There was 3 small bones of the hand and her kneecaps and small bones of the feet that were missing. And she said these are very, very small. She talked about the decomposing soft tissue. the little bit that was left, she had to remove that from the bones. She was looking for any chop marks, such as like if a knife had hit it, any other object had hit it. She said that post-mortem, long after the bones are in the ground, it'll become stained from the fluids and the soil. She said when you find a chop mark inside the channel, inside the part that was affected on the bone, it's white. And after death, you could see that it's been chipped away. So what she was saying is that normally if there was like a knife wound in the bone, it would have a whiteness in the mark. But because her bones were so degraded, any of these marks had been basically erased because the bones degraded and they were very how did she say that? They weren't smooth anymore. It had indentations and everything, so it's something that she couldn't see. She said the hyoid bone is U-shaped in the neck at the base of tongue by the voice box. She had one wing in the body, and that in younger people, it's in 3 pieces until it fuses together. And in females, it fuses together at the ages of 30, in their 30s or 40s. She said you can determine if it's broken because it's raised in the bone, meaning wherever the break is, or if there was a fracture, it would be raised in the bone. But that it does degrade over time. And she said that in cases that bone can fuse earlier than 30s or 40s, but she's never seen it fused in anybody that has been 18. She said the hyoid bone gets lots of attention. If in pieces, it can indicate something happened, such as strangulation, asphyxiation, things like that, but that she could not determine due to the degraded bones. She mentioned sports injuries, car accidents can cause injuries in the hyoid also. She was unable to distinguish between a fracture or the fact that it was unfused. Once again, fusion happens in the 30s and 40s. If the hyoid is fused, she can look for a fracture. She said, but until that is fused, there's a flexibility in the non-fused bone. And she did say that less than 50% of neck injuries had fractured hyoids. She says she's unable to rule it in or out. The hyoid is due to decomposition of the surfaces, and bones would be separated. Don't have any evidence to look at. The bones provided had no. The bones produced could not help in the manner of death. Let's see. There's lots of ways that leaves no evidence on a skeleton, that you can't tell that they were choked. If hyoid was fractured, would be by great force. And then there was an objection. Then they said, if the hyoid was fractured, would it prove strangulation? She said no. She said, would it prove it wasn't strangulation? She said no. Anything else on that you have, Bossy?
No, other than, and you might say this earlier because you take better notes, but I do remember her saying the reason she was focusing on this hyoid bone so much is because a lot of people um, think that because of when they watch TV and stuff like that, it's
Right.
referenced a lot in strangulation cases and stuff like that. So she pays particular attention to it in cases where she can make a determination, and she just couldn't in this one.
Right.
Mm.
So then the defense came up and he said, so you were hired to look for trauma? And she said yes, in the bones. And she said yes. And they said, so you did not see any fractures? And she said no. And you did not see any post-mortem marks? And she said yes. She saw one post-mortem mark. And they asked her, was this mark probably during excavation? And she said yes, it looked like it had been a shovel mark. Go ahead.
Yeah, can we just address something in your chat, please?
Yeah.
If there's any issues as to whether he did this or not, there were 2 other shows Marv did with witness testimony, and we also went over some phone calls where he had said so himself. So, and we're all entitled to our opinion. We're not doing anything, even putting those out, but anyone whose child was buried in a shallow grave and left there, they have every right to be up in arms. So the fact that you don't even show any sympathy for them tells me all I need to know about you as a person.
Well, Jordan, we're talking about why nobody can prove that he did or didn't. Because they secretly buried her in a shallow grave, she decomposed faster, and nobody can say it was an overdose, and nobody can say it was murder.
Perhaps if when he came out of his drunken stupor, had he called 911, an actual determination could have been made at that time.
Yeah, and you are correct. There was 2 people that testified. Well, there was one person that testified that he had her body over his shoulder. Yes, Alicia said that. Polly is correct. You don't usually physically bury people you don't have a hand in unaliving. Let's see here. Talking about trolls. Okay. So, she was talking about, they were asking her about the spinal column, that they had the separate bones and placed them in order, and they were placed back in the position as if they were in a person. And the defense says, but there was no ligaments. And she said there was some decomposing soft tissue, but no ligaments. And he said, and you looked for fractures and trauma, and nothing was found. And she said, correct. There were no stab wounds, cut marks, sharp force, projectiles from a gun, thermal from a fire. And she said, no, there was none observed.
In fact, I wrote down right here, she said, illicit drugs won't leave on a skeletal, won't leave a skeletal mark.
Right. Then they started talking about the hyoid bones, and he said, okay, so 18 years, it's highly unusual to fuse. And she said, yes, the average age is 30 to 40s. And an overdose would not leave mark on skeleton. So yeah, you're correct. And then we went to lunch. When we came back from lunch, Richard Benzinger, so he was from Kokomo law enforcement, came and testified. But before we start with that, does anybody have questions on what the pathologist, the coroner, or the anthropologist said? Because if you have questions, we want to clear any of those up before we keep going. And if you are on the rewatch crew, because we know that we're doing this early in the day and a lot of people aren't going to watch it till later, if you have questions, please put it in the comments below. I do check the comments on each one of these videos and answer as many questions as I can. All right, so I'm not seeing any questions pop up in the chat. So let's go on with the testimony of Richard Benzinger. Said in 2016, he was a detective. He worked the disappearance of Karena. In 2016, he worked in the computer lab, the actual exploitation, processing cell phones, and helped get search warrants and process those phones. He talked about the video at the Speedway gas station, picking up the evidence, making a copy of it, and entering it into the evidence property. Showed that the video showed that Flint was walking through and using an ATM machine, and that the Speedway was kitty corner of the village pantry. The prosecutor then brought out States 3, which is a map. He had the detective point out the Speedway, and asked him if he had reviewed the video evidence. He said yes. So the surveillance, the video showed that they were at Village Pantry and they saw Karena and Flint together in that area, and that they were both unstable on their feet, that they were intoxicated. He rendered assistance while processing the electronics, talked about surveillance in 2020. He was promoted to sergeant and worked on some other cases. Webster, the case agent, was reassigned and took over the case. And he took over the case, sorry. He went over all the evidence, reorganized, reviewed the facts and the evidence, and tried to piece everything together. He requested charges, but was told that the case was not strong enough, no evidence in 2 years after 2020. And that Karena had not been discovered. They had multiple leads, but they were false. They had a dive team that came in and looked for the the body. They were told that the body was dropped in water. They searched water, found nothing, and that was on October 9th of 2020. He said that they received a tip from the NCIC from Dallas, Texas. Tips by other investigators that a body had been located, and that there was a hit in the system that said it could be Karena. So they contacted law enforcement and sent dental records, and then were advised that that was not Karena that was found. He said in August 2021, he had a follow-up interview with Brad and Alicia. They had no leads to Karena. And this was previously mentioned by Webster. And that was because Brad and Alicia at this time were lying to police, saying that they had no idea what happened, that Karena had never been there, they hadn't seen her. He then went on to talk about Jacksonville, Florida. In March of 2022, they received tips that they had seen Karena. But none of those tips panned out. He said they had surveillance at the South Washington address, and in June of 2022, at the Summit Salon Academy, they were watching a vehicle that Flint was driving, and he parked in the parking lot in a silver Saturn, and that he got out and went in. That Flint remained a suspect through June of 2022, and they did have the grand jury, and that they did wiretap phones. He said the investigation really ramped up during this time. So they spoke to Brad Wheeler again. The arrest warrant came July of 2022. They knew he was in the house with Brad and Alyssa Wheeler. They forced entry and located Flint and took him into custody. Brad and Alicia were also inside. There was rugs and paraphernalia found, and Brad and Alicia were also arrested and detained. Brad expressed wanting to talk with him. He was transported to the police station and interviewed. At first, he was reluctant to provide info because he wanted assurances and immunity for him and his wife. They talked to the prosecutor, and they said before any assurances would be provided, such as immunity, they needed to know what type of evidence he had, where, who, and what happened. So Brad gave them the info, and they took him to where Karena was buried. They showed a video of the car ride showing the detective driving all the way there and Brad in the back seat. You could just see him some of the times moving or whatever. There was a camera that was worn during the whole ride. States produced Exhibit 34, which is a map of the area where Karena was found. Said that it was in Miami County in a wooded area in a trailer park. And the wooded area was right behind that trailer park where she was found. It was north and east of Galveston Air Base. They showed States 25, the mobile home park, on the map. States 34 is consistent and shows the trailer park and Grissom Air Force Base. It just shows them traveling on 31 from Grissom Air Force Base, continuing north. They made a couple turns and then found the trailer park, and he took them to the area. Bossy, anything you have on that?
No.
Okay. States 32 was an Axion video of the drive. Shows them driving car, no conversation. Brad is in the back seat. Some conversation or directions were being given. Gets out of the car, takes them to the woods, goes into the woods, shows them the area. They spray painted the ground in a few areas with points of interest. There was 2 or 3 areas. He said that when she was found, the clothes are in the trash bag. They didn't take anything off the body.
I have during this part that let's see, he was in the back seat and he was giving him directions and they were marking with orange that they left the scene with Brad Wheeler and to take him back to the police station to make arrangements, and they secured the scene.
Yes.
And I will be right back. As you can hear, my little doggy wants to go out.
Okay, go ahead. The detective did said that they appreciate the help, that Brad couldn't carry something like this forever. And Brad was crying and emotional. His wife was at the station. In the video, you could hear him sniffling and heavy breathing as they were standing there and heading out of the woods. Brad goes to the police station, met with his wife, made arrangements. They secured the crime scene, brought out tapes, and they taped off a larger area than what Brad showed them. And then had somebody sit out there because it was nighttime. So they had an officer sit out there and secure the scene so that the next morning they could go in and start excavating these areas. The following day, they combed through the woods and excavated her body. It wasn't far from the markings, about 20 or 30 yards. The body was recovered. Portions of the trash bag were in the form of a human head, was exposed initially. The body was removed and goes to the coroner to Miami County morgue. It was x-rayed, secured. He attended the autopsy. States 35 is the certificate of analysis. Shows the items of evidence. They had samples of the brush. They had 2 patella bones, which were the kneecaps. That they had found, I think, separately. They did identify Karena from DNA. And they asked, how many dig efforts did it take? And he said multiple. It was a learning experience. The more experienced investigators were there right along with them. And then he was talking about when a body is buried, it loses its mass underground and creates a valley or low area. He said there were several of these. So they were taking soil samples looking for clay on top of the soil, the topsoil there. Because he said when somebody is buried and then covered up, the clay and the topsoil get mixed together. So they were probing these areas looking for this difference of the clay being more at the top than at the bottom. They did finally find one in a rectangle pattern. They slowly removed the vegetation and the soil and found plastic was found on the tip of the probe. So he's describing the rectangle area. They removed any vegetation, any grass, plants, or whatever from it, stuck a probe down in it, and when they brought the probe up, it had a little piece of plastic from the plastic bag. Then the defense came and was asking questions about the retrieval of the body and transportation of Brad on July 18, 2022, that they didn't actually find her remains until the 19th. The defense asked where the bone scans were done, and he said he wasn't sure. He wasn't part of the transport. He said that they asked him when the autopsy was done, and he said a day or two after they found her remains. And then the defense asked once again about this root ball and how the body was discovered when they did the scan. And he said when the scan was done, she was encased in dirt, roots, vegetation, and the bones and her clothes. He said that Brad and Alicia gave multiple statements that were false. That from July 18th of 2022 and prior, all of their statements that they gave were false. After immunity was given, he said immunity was offered previous to them getting arrested, but it was not taken. They still said they didn't know what happened, didn't know where she was, and would not accept any immunity deal. They said on 7/18/2022 there was charges for murder. Brad and Alicia accepted the immunity deal. So what did this immunity deal cover? It covered Alicia not being charged for rugs. It covered any pending criminal charges, and that Alicia had to be released from jail that day, and that neither Brad or Alicia would have any charges regarding Karina's murder. They took their statements. They took in 2020 Kylie Warner's statements, and they got the gas station videos. So then he was talking about Webster getting replaced. went to higher ups to file charges, and the defense says, but when you did that, they didn't have enough evidence, so there was no charges filed. And he said correct. That he was not the lead detective at first, but he replaced Webster. And he said, and Captain Banush was your superior? Yes. He had to prove things in 2020? Yes. You had Kylie's statement and video? Yes. Flint Farmer was your prime suspect? Yes. But in 2020 through 2022, what stopped you? He said, we didn't have a body or Wheeler's statements. And he said, and then charges were filed, and he answered yes. And he said, but you filed those charges before a body was found. And he said yes again. And that was because Brad led you to Karena. And he said yes. And he said, and Brad is the one that buried the body, and that it was not buried in a coffin, and no services were performed. And then the defense said, well, Brad murdered her. And he said, I don't believe so. And they said, but Brad Wheeler talked about an overdose. And the detective said he didn't specify exactly how she died. Yeah, and one of the other things of the immunity, I just need to tell you, I think that comes up later, but so Alyssa had some charges from 2021 that kept getting continued. And the husband wanted those charges to go away with this immunity also. And what the prosecutor stated was they would wait and see how this went as long as they testified truthfully and she didn't get in any other trouble, he would get those charges removed. So the defense says you indicated Alicia Wheeler stated overdose. There was objection to hearsay. It was overruled. In 2022, Brad, in interview room at police department, and they said in 2016, Brad stated that he was not there that morning when the body was found. He was at work, correct? And he said yes. Alyssa and Flint Farmer were in Flint Farmer's apartment when Brad got home. And then there was objection to hearsay, and it was withdrawn.
Wait a minute. I thought they said that they took her body over to their apartment.
They did, but after that, it was said by this detective that Alyssa and Flint went to Flint's apartment so they didn't have to sit with the body.
Oh, that's right.
I kind of lost where it was at. Hang on a minute. Troublemaker says, which Alicia lied on the stand, stating she never knew where the body was buried, yet Brad stated she was with him and both were not on drugs that day, and she was with him at Menards and the burial place. Correct. Oh, I found my spot. The defense asked, did Brad talk to Flint? He said yes. And then he asked him, did he wake up hunkered over? Yes. Asked him if he had H. Yes. Asked Brad buried without instructions from Flint. And he answered, don't recall. Body was taken the following day and was previously put in the storage shed. That Brad had put her in the shed, then the next morning put her in the truck and took her and buried her. Yes. Never informed Flint where the body was. And the officer said that Brad stated he didn't say to anyone where it was. Then they were talking about Kylie Warner's taped calls. Yes, there was several reports where a wire was wore, I believe so. And none of the recordings had confessions. There was an objection. They reviewed the phone calls. No. When talking over, you listen to calls. No. And then it says it was over drugs. Then it talks about Sean Haas and Galloway transporting Karena to Sean Haas transporting Karena. Or no, not Karena. Sean Haas transporting Kylie to make calls. And he said he didn't know that this happened before he was the lead. And then he was asked, did you provide Kylie with recording devices? He said, I did not. And then that was the end of that testimony.
And I think the reason I can't help you out very much is because my pen had ran out of ink.
Yeah. Let's see here.
And who do you have as your next witness, Marv?
Andrew
Rinbarger?
Rinbacher or Rinbarker or something.
Okay, yes.
Do you have any notes on him?
Yes, I do.
Do you want to go through your notes? I'm going to run out and just have a quick cigarette.
Sure. And so so he's an Andrew Rinbarger is who I wrote down. He's an Indiana State Police detective.
Well, I'm glad you wrote that because I wrote Rinbarker, Rinbarter.
And it's hard to hear in there. I might not even be correct. So I believe I wrote down he's a DEA sergeant. Indicated that Kokomo Police Department wanted assistance with electronic interception, and that he was the most qualified in text, phone, and MMS messages. Must prove that the phone is pertinent to the investigation. Basically, it's a wiretap. Wiretap is an old school term for it. It's called electronic interception, and they do it via a phone carrier. They submit the reason that they want to intercept phone calls, text messages, MMS messages to a judge for review. And they do this when there's I wrote down the exhaustion phase, like when there's no other forms of investigation that they can do, and they're not getting any more leads or anything like that, but they have a reason to suspect someone as a person of interest. So They get GPS warrants, interviews, and they tried and they failed. I wrote down it's dangerous. They must establish that other efforts were exhausted. And there's actually very few wiretaps that are actually used for investigative purposes. I wrote down pin, trap, and trace, which is it registers the dialed numbers. It surveillances like the pings. It's not a ping is not an electronic interception. It just depends on the carrier. The process of a quote unquote wiretap, once approved, super approved is the correct verbiage, means it meets the legal standards. For example, they can wiretap a phone for a period of time, let's say for 4 hours, or up to a day or so. They can do their telephone, text, Facebook monitoring. There's an office in Indy for wire, but they can do satellite, but that's very rare to use satellite for interception because of spotty service. They went through the Indy. I said Indy, and I believe it's the Indy location because Farmer had a hardline internet. So he was kind of explaining that they want to be as least intrusive as possible, minimal breach of privacy. So, for example, if me and a friend were calling, then they could listen for 2 minutes on, and then they would have to minimize it down the call for a minute to where they could not listen. And then they would go back and listen for another 2 minutes. And they said until, the surveillance ends or until it becomes pertinent, which means if they're listening in during those 2 minutes and they hear something that is pertinent to the investigation, then they are able to continue listening, to my understanding. If it's for a married couple, it's a 1 minute to 1 minute intervals. They call it spot checking. So it's to not be intrusive. So they'll listen for 1 minute and they will stop listening for another minute and then go back for 1 minute and listen. And that's for like married couples, people of clergy, lawyers. So there was a liaison between Kokomo Police Department and Indianapolis ISP. It's kind of like the way he explained it was like being on a 3-way call. The Indianapolis location is basically, from my understanding, their server, where their server room is. It uses a program to monitor and intercept live, like a live wire pops up red and says minimize. Okay, if you fail to minimize, you must provide an explanation. So I'm just going to explain this. So you cannot go over that 2 minute or 1 minute mark, whichever the case may be, depending on who you have under surveillance. If you go over that time, he said that you have to provide an explanation as to why you were being so intrusive into listening into that call. He said that he has a rule for their particular team. That's probably a loose layman's term. That if you haven't heard anything by 1 minute and 45 seconds, just to go ahead and minimize it, because you're probably not going to hear anything pertinent to the investigation in that last 15 seconds. And that protects the department from any of the other legalities that goes with being overly intrusive of listening to these phone calls. They did numerous taps. They did 3 last year. I wrote down 2018, approximately, they started monitoring his calls. They had one line and Facebook, and it was new. They monitored his Facebook, and other law enforcement monitored the phone taps. They did a synopsis and transcripts for pertinent calls and text messages. They did 24-hour surveillance. I wrote down names. They did a 24-hour surveillance on Flint Farmer, Felicita Rubo, who goes by the name Tot, Olivia Farmer Bell, Holly Baker, Vincent Farmer, and they enter States Exhibit number 38 and Discovery number 39. And I wrote down transcript, and I also wrote down reference number 745. Olivia called Flint on July 6th of 2022. A header was already populated on the wiretap phone calls. The call start time was not populating. I wrote down the 5th to the 18th, and anything that I missed, Marv can go back into detail in. I wrote down a wiretap. July 6th of 2022 was a phone call with Olivia. It was a summons for her grand jury. Number 36 and number 37 are call transcripts, and call number 720 was Flint Farmer checking his voicemail. Exhibits number 40 to 41, reference 757, the call with Blaine Nelson, which is Tot's son, on 7/6 of 2022. And this is where I started writing down the actual phone call that they recording that we heard.
Yeah, I think the only thing that I had, it was very hard to hear these phone calls. In the one call, I have Mark McCain wants me to go to jail, doesn't have to say anything. He just wants to subpoena everyone. And then
So I have on this call with Blaine Nelson on July 6th of 2022,
yeah,
says, let it roll. Don't give them the satisfaction. Just let it ride. And this is Flint speaking to him. He said they're trying to railroad, and it's just all speculation.
we haven't done anything wrong. Yep.
Something I wrote, I think I wrote Marcia, but that could be wrong. He kept saying there's no body. She could be alive. Waiting on attorney. How can you question me about murder without a body?
Yep. There's no evidence showing she was murdered. She could still be alive.
A family wasn't involved. The more you say, the more they twist your words on these dumbass stories. And this is where I have the Mark McCann looked in the country. But maybe Beth, Brad, and Alicia. I think that's where they're talking about, and I'm inferring, or speculating, because they went and they searched at all of these places and spoke to all of them.
Yeah, we have nothing to say, dumbass stories and people who think they know what's going on.
Right. He said there is no crime committed. There's no evidence. This is Blaine saying this, and Flint Farmer agrees. It's all bullshit. And the call ends. That's how much I have on that phone call.
I just have that grandma posted yesterday. It's all BS. And I said, and I just put a note in there that hearing Blaine's voice again brought me shivers because I had watched him on the other streams. Go ahead. You're rocking it.
Okay. So then I see where it says exhibits number 45 and 46, reference number 5730 is a call with Vincent.
Yep.
And I'm sorry, I don't know if it's Farmer speaking or his son. It is, I just don't have time to write down which. Sometimes I remember, but it says testify the grand jury, plead the fifth. They can't force you to testify. I wrote down immunity, murder charge, DNA from her family. DNA don't really have shit. Even if they had a body, it doesn't mean I did it. They met Jerry and told him. Met Jerry, picked up on Washington.
That was where they were saying Gabe Ellis picked her up on Washington.
Okay. May go straight to jail. Trial to prove innocence. Wrongfully innocent, I wrote down.
Yeah, I'm going to have to sit in jail over bullshit and prove I didn't do it.
He said he's going to sue the pants off of them.
Yep.
Wants the family to be prepared. This isn't NCIS or CSI. Be ready for anything on national news, in the papers, etc. I wrote, Dad, be honest. Have to deal with it. And this is where I believe Vince was talking about he has to deal with testifying on behalf of at the grand jury proceedings.
Yeah, because I have makes Vince sick. He has to experience and deal with it. So yeah.
Let's see. He said he takes Benadryl to sleep. He said he's praying for him. He was genuinely concerned how he was spending his time and what he was doing. And then that's all I have on that one. Do you have anything else?
Nope.
And then they have number 47 and 48 exhibits, reference number 6906. And this is where I wrote down the defense and prosecutor are talking about a 29-second call duration.
It was a call duration of 22 minutes, but the transcript is shorter because certain things are not eligible.
Okay. He says, hey, how you doing? They tried to lead down the path for info, but the jury's smarter than that, the grand jury. If there was everything, and this one was really hard for me to jot down.
And just in reference, he was talking to his brother. We found out as we listened.
Not going to discover anything new. I wrote down Brad and Alicia, or Alicia. How do you say her name, Marv?
Alicia.
Brad and Alicia.
Or Alicia. No.
Alicia. Alicia. Tried with them, nothing there. Then they can move on, and us too. They don't even have a body or know if she's dead. I wrote down murder, not content, and want to ruin our lives. Are you feeling okay? We'll be able to testify, tell the story to the jury, quash testimony, just plead the fifth. Do you have anything else on that one, Marv? I'm sure you do.
He was talking about miserable people, and then he kind of trailed off. Don't realize the extent they are doing something. Wants to tell his story to McCann, but McCann won't offer him immunity.
Okay. And then I have number 50, reference number 579 is I wrote call with his mom. Is that correct?
It was an unknown female, and
I did write that too, but didn't you say
but they said it's a call to his mom because what in the opening of the call it says, "Hi, Mom."
okay. Okay, that's what I thought. So it says, "Hey mom, how you doing?" Case by case policy for entering someone's name into text. And I wrote the call. This grows so fast.
Yeah.
Back from courthouse, didn't testify, but wanted to, and hoped for immunity. Prosecutor denied. Um, prepping for the worst. Bringing in drug users to testify. Told him he said caught her stealing, strip searched, and then broke neck. Doesn't look good.
Right before that, I
Go ahead.
have, it doesn't look good. He tells her it doesn't look good. They don't have any evidence against me.
Okay. Kylie said, I'm sorry, Marv.
That's all right. Kylie said you strip searched her before broke her neck. I never said I did that. Those were all rumors. She went and testified to that shit. It doesn't look good. I don't know why she would say that. I'm not supposed to talk about it. Call me back. She's still sick from COVID. I've been around her, so I don't want to come around there. And I didn't kill her. You got anything besides that?
No, the same thing.
Okay.
Oh, well, I do. The last thing I heard was something, take care of it. So I don't know if he just meant like he's going to take care of it. I don't know. I don't want to imply, but I did write down take care of it.
Yeah.
And then I have the next call, number 51 and 52.
When we say 51 and 52 or 49 and 50, what the prosecution is doing is they're playing the call, but they're also giving the jurors the transcripts for each call. So they have to put each one of those in evidence separately.
Yes, and the reference number, like this one, the reference number is 1552. That's the reference number of the call. Like that's what the call is numbered in reference to the system that they used.
Right.
Do you know who this call is with?
I put mom, but I don't know if that's right.
And I didn't write anything. I wrote, how do you know any of this? Maybe he did it. What I'm saying, don't even know if she's dead. She's beside herself. Entire family called as witnesses. No body of a murdered person. Jerry called her upset, writing it down, and then that's all I have on that one. So, like I said, some of these calls are very hard to hear.
Okay, so on this one I have, how do you know there's been a murder? They don't even know she's dead. We don't even know she's dead, and I'm charged with murder. Something about, oh, Kylie's just besides herself. Be calm. Every single one has been called in as a witness. Kylie, she's the one I'm worried about. She's making it up. And then Jerry called her all upset. And Beth.
Okay, so next I have Exhibit 54, which is the text between Olivia Farmer and Flint Farmer.
Yep.
And I wrote the text versus phone. It comes in individual, like split text into it's the rate at which it's intercepted.
Yep.
And then I wrote transcriptions. They did a sidebar. Um,
And I have it was split into two. Data hits tower, tries to send in order, but it could be sent out of order.
yeah, because isn't that like the rate that it's intercepted based on each person's individual carrier, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, I have assisted with the next thing I have is the sidebar. And then they were talking about assisted with the warrant service on the 18th, required a warrant after seeing paraphernalia.
I have requested warrant of house because they saw a crystal substance and a pipe. But going back to that text, what happened, the reason we don't have the text is because there was an objection in a sidebar. And I think the judge sustained the objection, so we didn't actually hear the text.
Yes, and it happened a couple times, I believe, with at different times with different situations. So, like I said, you hear a little bit of information, and the next thing you know, you're just onto a whole new topic. So,
Right. The next thing I have is they're talking about the King's trailer.
Yes. KPD had an interview with the Wheelers. They went to King's Trailer Court. I wrote down Jason Page. On the 19th, they located a shallow grave via probes. I wrote down Detective Renbarger. That's all I have, and then except for Cross is next.
Yeah, located shallow grave and helped exhume her remains. That's all I had extra.
Okay. Cross. The taps became necessary once all other resources were exhausted. Farmer served July 18th, 2022. Farmer was served with a warrant on July 18th of 2022, and that was issued prior to the remains recovered. And I wrote 5th and 18th. That's all I have on that part.
Okay, so I have wiretaps were a necessity, yes. Only issued after everything was exhausted, yes. Did Flint Farmer confess to the killings? No. He said he didn't, correct? Yes. He was charged July 18th, 2022, prior to the remains, yes. I do have from the 5th to the 18th, the calls were recorded. Were you involved in the grand jury? No. Was the grand jury dismissed? And he said, I don't know.
Is this where you're on redirect?
Yeah, and then the prosecutor took over.
And he said ISP can run intercept. He doesn't believe it can be done independently.
Right. Only in conjunction with.
Yes. Farmer has said in his recordings several different versions, and they varied from other accounts. To his family, mother, children, any statements from Farmer that Karena OD'd. That's all I have on that. This was a lot of back and forth during this part too.
Yeah, so in recording, there were several different versions or revisions, and it wasn't consistent. How many people not related to Flint Farmer? None. All were children, mothers, sisters, told different versions to family. Yes. Any statements from Flint Farmer regarding an overdose? And he said no. So what he is stating is in those calls, there wasn't any statements from Flint indicating to his family that Karena had overdosed. And then the defense took over again.
Yep, and I have state police intercepted calls for 13 days.
Yep.
They didn't play all the calls. Reviewed that KPD. That I think I wrote KPD does. For their statements, Karena McClerkin overdosed. Doesn't remember. The Wheeler stating that she overdosed. No prior knowledge of the case prior to working on call interceptions. That's all I have.
But you were involved after the body resumed, yes. He got a warrant for the safe. And that was it. And then the prosecutor did not have any other questions. Okay, so that brings up Wednesday's testimony. And no, Tuesday's testimony. And you have all of that because the only person that testified on Tuesday was Flint's sister Tot. And we only had a half day. We only had session in the afternoon because the judge had a previous engagement in the morning, or one of the attorneys. I'm not sure which one. So this is where because I wasn't there on Tuesday. So Bossy has all the notes from Tot's testimony.
Yes. And I did my best. And I'm asking, could you just give me 1 minute? Because my dog is looking at me to go out again, and I apologize.
No, you're okay.
Perfect.
Are there any questions on what you've heard up until now? Bossy did a great job explaining the whole wiretapping and intercepting, that it's a very last resort. They have to exhaust every other tool in their tool belt, and very few of those are actually given. But in this case, it was. She talked about how they listen to the calls. That's very important, so that they minimize the intrusiveness on those calls. That's not testimony I've ever heard of before, so I found that fascinating, on what their process is, how they do things, and how they go about listening to the calls and waiting for, going beyond that 2-minute window or that 1-minute window, only if they hear pertinent information about the case. And that if they accidentally go over that 2 minutes or 1 minute, there's a detailed report that they have to fill out as to why they continued listening. So they do shorten the time that they listen, usually the 1 minute, 45 seconds. And he did state in my notes, I just have that they'll actually wait until like 2:05 to start listening again, so that they make sure that they're covered and they don't listen too long. Otherwise, I mean, she hit everything else on the nail on the head. Oh, the only other thing I did have on the wiretaps and the intercept is that they had 2 people per line, 1 line for Facebook. No one in Indiana had tapped Facebook before, so that was new. And then we went into the calls, yeah. So that, and like I said, we tried to do our best on the calls to take notes, but they were very hard to hear. Voices were lower than in past calls that we heard. So it was hard to hear and catch everything, but we did our best. And I just have court on Tuesday starts at 1 p.m. All jurors are to be at the courthouse by 12:45. Let's see here. And actually, we're doing pretty good here. I said if this takes us 4 or 5 hours to do, I don't think it's going to. Bossy will go over Tot's testimony here. And Wednesday was really in and out of court. So we don't have too much more to go.
Okay. So just so we know, it's May 6th, 2025, and we got started about 1:24 p.m. The little red clocks, hard to read in the court as well.
Oh, so you guys didn't get started right at 1 that day?
No.
I'm not surprised.
And it was the prosecutor today was TJ White.
Yes.
It was Felicita Rubo. And her nickname is Tot, like T-O-T, and she is Flint Farmer's sister. He asked if Mr. Farmer is here, and she said yes. And then he asked what he's wearing, and then there was a an objection to that, and they just moved on. And so he said that he wants to bring her attention back to October of 2016. Is it fair to say that a substantial amount of time has passed? And your recollection, may not be what it would have been back in 2016. I mean, he asked what stands out about Flint Farmer. He asked such as where he lived. Did he live with her? He had just gotten his Social Security, got an apartment on Washington. So she is testifying to, that he did live with her. He got his Social Security settlement. And then that is when he moved out and got his apartment on Washington. She was going over and checking on him because he had no car. She made sure that he had cigarettes. Prosecutor asked if she recalled when he moved out exactly, and she said no. He's talking about the context about why we're here today, because of Karena McClerkin going missing, and asks if she recalls anything, and she said that she recalls a few things. She gave statements to the police on when Flint Farmer moved into his apartment and everything. And she gave her statements to James Nielsen, I believe, on November, and then another date was November 14th of 2022.
Okay.
They're marking a copy of it for the state's exhibit number 75. And he asks Tot to read through it to refresh her memory. And she did. She read through this transcript for probably 5 minutes. And he asks her if it's her words, and she says yes. And also states exhibit number 76 is her deposition on November 14th of 2022. And she reads through that. And he says, does that generally look accurate as to your statements? And he says he wants to take her and directs her to lines 5 through 10. Because she can't recall when Flint Farmer moved out of her house into the Washington apartment. Did she know the Wheelers? Yes, but only through Flint and them living next door. In terms of Farmer in that time in his life, was she concerned? Was she aware of his settlement and concerned? She basically said yes. She said that she was concerned about him. She became aware of him getting the settlement, knew he was getting a settlement, and that she was concerned that he'd overdo it. And those were her words. She was concerned he'd overdo it. She was concerned that he was hanging out with certain individuals. She said that every time she called him, Alicia always had his phone.
Why is that?
I'm not sure. She said that she called one time and she told Alicia she said if she calls again and she has her phone, she'd beat the brakes off of her. And these were her words, like testimony
So
that she was testifying to.
she told Alicia that if she called again and Alicia had the phone, she would beat the brakes off of her?
Yes.
Oh, interesting.
She said that Farmer always seems sedated and she was concerned about him. She was concerned that maybe they were keeping him sedated.
Meaning Alicia and Brad?
Yes, because he had gotten this settlement.
Okay.
And that they were wanting to get at his money. She said that that Flint always kept the key to his safe on a chain around his neck, because they were afraid that some people would steal from him.
Okay.
She said that people were always in and out. She said people could go in and out of that place and he would never even know it. He told her he bought a safe, and she said that was a good idea. That's a safe place for him to keep his paperwork, to protect it from a fire, keep his money in, and that he bought the safe when he moved into the apartment on Washington.
Okay.
They started talking about her garage, that she was saying that in her garage there were some thefts that had occurred. She had a bar in her garage, and she was concerned over him keeping it there. This part I wasn't really sure. It was a lot of runaround. Okay. She said that she went and got this safe. She told the officers that she begged and told Officer Nielsen that she begged and begged Flint to let her come and get this safe and take it to her house where it would be safe, because she was concerned people were going to be stealing off of him.
Got it.
And she told this Officer Nielsen that Flint finally relinquished the safe to her. She said
she put it in her garage.
I'm not, no, the part about the garage, and thank you, I'm going to go back and clarify. She was talking about how she has a bar in her garage and that people are in and out of there, and that's where Flint would hang out, and that thefts had occurred in the garage while Flint was hanging out there and living there. So that's why she was concerned that when he got this apartment on Washington Street, that people would be stealing from him when he moved out over there, because she had witnessed people stealing off of him while he was hanging out in her garage or whatever. So yeah, that's just to clarify that part. She said the day that she got the safe. She went over to Flint's house and he had to his apartment and he had a cable guy there. And that she made the cable guy leave because Flint was so incoherent.
Right.
And then I wrote down November 1st, 2016 deposition. And he states exhibit number 75 and page 9, lines 1 through 9. And he says, prior, she stated the safe wasn't there. He says, does that aid you in your recollection with memory refreshed? What did you tell Officer Nelson? She said it had been almost 3 weeks until the police picked up the safe. Again, this part gets a little, they're going through a lot. And what I believe is, it says been almost 3 weeks until the police picked it up. So I believe, I don't recall what they're referencing. If it had been 2 to almost 3 weeks, that she had it until the police picked it up, or 2 to 3 weeks since Karena had went missing. Okay. And I think I clarify later on because they go back to this and they have states exhibit number 1. He says, can you identify this? She says she's never seen it. She never knew she existed. And she's referring to Karena. That the date, October 13th of 2016. If your report's taken on November 1st of 2022 and October 13th of 2022, you told the officer you had the safe 2 to 3 weeks. On November 1st of 2022, you told Detective Nielsen he finally relinquished the safe. What do you mean? She said, look, he was under the influence, and I kept saying, let me take it. You can get into it anytime. She went to get it, and the cable guy was there, and she sent him away. She asked Flint, where is the safe? And he said, it's next door. She went next door. The safe was heavy. So she went next door to the Wheelers. She went there to get the safe. Finally, the day that he relinquished it to her is the day that she showed up there, and the cable guy was there. Flint was so incoherent, she sent the cable guy away, but Flint was able to tell her that the safe isn't here, it's next door at the Wheelers.
How can that be?
And this is what I believe the state's point is, and why he was bringing out her reports between her state, in November in October of 2022 versus her testimony.
Yeah.
Okay. And he said, she was telling him, just let me take it. You can get into it anytime. She went there. She sent the cable guy away. She asked Farmer, where is the safe? He said, it's next door. She said she went over there. All I remember is this was a heavy safe, and she just kept going on and on about how heavy this safe was. She said that both the Wheelers were there and that she was able to get it and carry it about halfway to her car, and that Brad had to come and help her carry it the rest of the way to her car just because it was just so heavy.
Yeah.
She went home, and then her husband had to help her bring it from her car into the house. She said that law enforcement wanted to search her house, and she said no. And
Huh. Where'd you go?
and she says because are you talking to me?
Yeah, you cut out a little bit.
Oh, I'm sorry. So she said that law enforcement showed up and they wanted to search her house, and she said no. She took them straight to the garage because she knows that they wanted this safe. And they showed exhibit number 75. Oh, I'm sorry, this was afterwards. And he said, how? And how do you know they wanted this safe? And she said, sorry, I lost my place. She said, oh, because they said so. And then exhibit number 75 is shown, which is a picture of the safe.
Okay.
And he says, have you ever accessed or seen the contents of the safe? And she testified that he keeps his keys on his neck. Yes. She testifies she has concerns with the Wheelers and that safe. Yes. She's very angry the safe was at the Wheelers and felt they were trying to get Flint's money.
Mm.
And they
Even though
asked
they
if
didn't have access to the key.
right. Exactly. And then they asked, when you went to get this safe, was it covered? And she doesn't recall if it was covered. She said it always remained locked and I never saw the contents. They asked, was it just sitting out in the open in the living room? Like, where was it located at the Wheelers? And she doesn't remember if it was just out in the open in the living room or not. And they said, did Flint ask her to hurry up to get the safe? And she said no, not that she recalls. They asked a lot about October 12th through the 13th. And then this is again where she says she never knew she existed. And I believe that we're referencing Karena. And she said maybe she heard about 2 weeks afterwards through word on the street that Karena was missing.
Oh, okay.
He states that he wouldn't let she said he states that he wouldn't let Karena in, that he walked her to Village Pantry, bought her some cigarettes, and she got in a car and they parted ways. She didn't know that Farmer was a suspect until later. Said that, and they asked, how did you know? And she said that someone had told him. On November 6, 2016, had Farmer told you about a ping out of Chicago? She said, yes, enough. Do you remember enough to testify? And she says, no. Page 38 with Detective Nielsen, lines 27 through 30, and she reads over her statement and did refresh her recollection. Asked Nielsen if they had heard. So her testimony, she said she asked Nielsen if they had heard they had a ping on Karena's phone in a basement in Chicago, and Farmer told her that. And then on November 14th of 2022, when you were asked during your 2016 response when Farmer called and asked to pick up the safe, and she said, no, she did it on her own. I know I took terrible notes on this. I apologize. It was a lot. Hello? Can you guys still hear me in chat? Okay, thank you, Miracle. Okay, so let me go back here. On November 1st, 2016, a few weeks having the safe relinquished, but later in 2022 says she went on her own and picked it up. She said that Farmer Flint didn't want her to control his money. And she figured that he would finally call. 2016, It was all at his request, but in 2022, you stated you did it on your own. You stated your memory would be better in 2016. And then she says, she doesn't remember. 2022 deposition, do you recall saying where the safe was at Flint's? And she said, it wasn't at Flint's, it was at the Wheelers. He said, did you describe it would fit in a box? Or would you dispute it if, would you say that it was too big? Not too big? And she said no. To ask questions, sorry. In your deposition, you were asked if you called Farmer to state getting a safe. And he shows her some pages 9, lines 3 through 9 of her depositions. And she said, yeah, I probably called, but don't remember talking to him. But if I said that, yes, I don't want to perjure myself. 2016, Farmer was reaching out to you to get a safe. There was an objection, and then they're talking about evidence already being on record, and so they told them to rephrase the question. He said, did you testify Farmer asked you to get the safe? She said, as far as she can remember. She said, it's been 9 years. I don't remember, but if I said that in statements he calls, then yes, I'm trying to be as honest as I can. Why say in 2022 you said in a deposition you came on your own? They talk about a drug stupor, about Farmer being in a drug stupor. If he kept saying no, then how would you get it? She states she was just going to go take it. In 2016, he prompted versus 2022, you went on your own. There's no reason to dispute that statement, correct? She said, yes. Do you recall the day in the interview room? No. The same day they did the search warrant? No. Do you recall what time the safe? And I missed some of this. And then on November 14th of 2022, the deposition conducted. How long was the safe in your possession? And she thinks a couple weeks. The deposition, I wrote down the pages. She guesses 2 to 3 days. Is it fair the deposition says you stated 2 to 3 days? Yes. What was said in 2016 versus 2022? Can you explain? She said, that was 2 years ago. You forget stuff. I forget until I read and refresh, but if you documented it and said I did, did anyone talk to you about the contents of testimony? She said no. So this is where he's asking if anyone has talked to her thus far about anyone else that has testified or testimony during the trial. And she said no. She said that she saw a podcast, and the prosecutor said she knows she's trying to be fair and honest. And this is where I believe I misunderstood, because I believe later on it's clarified that she was wanting him to know that there was a podcast being done, that she was aware that a podcast was being done.
Okay.
On the trial. So I'm not sure. This is what I wrote down, and
Yeah.
I'm just writing down what I can, and I will read it. He said, did anyone talk to you about the contents of their testimony? No. She saw podcast. The prosecutor knows. She's tried to be fair and honest. What has Flint said? He's claimed his innocence. Kylie is a liar. What has he said happened to Karena McClerkin? And she said, as far as, and he said since October of 2016. He didn't tell me anything. He said, I'm asking with what Farmer told you in October of 2016 through November of 2016. Since then, he's told her it was accidental overdose. Told she came to party, etc. All he said was accidental overdose, and he is innocent. That's all he said. And then the state's Exhibit 67, and there's a sidebar. Whew. I don't know how you do this all the time, Marv.
It's not easy.
It's definitely not easy.
At all. No, but I think you did a good job. Basically, she's trying to say that he was high or whatever all the time and incoherent, and the main thing was about the safe. Why did she go get it? And
Correct. And was it at his request or her request?
Right. Did he tell her to go get it? That was the big thing.
Yes.
A lot of things she couldn't remember. I mean, it's been years. I wouldn't be able to remember it either. What did you say here versus here versus here? I'd have to make them show me the reports too. Miracle Heart says, I don't know how you guys can even take all these notes. I'll tell you, and Bossy can attest to this, your head is down and you're constantly writing, and by the end of the day, your hand is so cramped it's not even funny.
My eyes just get very blurry. It's just like no more. My vision gets blurred.
Yeah. Okay, so Wednesday was an interesting day. Because you guys left court Tuesday after she testified.
Oh,
go ahead.
That's just the beginning of her testimony.
Oh, there's more?
There's lots more.
Okay.
I believe so. Let me see. Yes.
Okay.
I believe so. Let me just read through. And then they also asked if any knowledge of the court proceeding thus far, etc.
Okay.
And then they enter State's Exhibit number 78, and she's reading over that. And they said, ma'am, are you familiar with this document? And she says, yes. They said, can you identify it? And she said that this is a letter from my brother to me.
Oh, yes, the letter. Okay.
States number 66 and 65 is a phone call. There's no objection to playing it. And the jury's reading over transcripts, and he says, while the jury reads, do you remember the context of the letter? And she said, yes, it was early on in his incarceration.
Okay.
And then they played, I wrote phone call, but I don't recall them playing it, because next I go, letter he wrote said, you may be called to testify. Oh, maybe this is the phone call. I'm sorry. I said, I don't know how you do this. Yes, this is the phone call. And it's the first part I caught was letter he wrote. He said, you may be called to testify. Your reputation is impeccable. There's our addicts, etc. And earlier you said Kylie's a liar. Okay, so this isn't. And then, yes, so this is back to questioning, and I apologize.
That's all right.
Do you know who Farmer was referencing in terms of destroying? And I do vaguely recall hearing that on a phone call. And I think the reason I don't have this wrote down, but I remember it, is because I don't even know. I apologize. But he said, do you know who Farmer was referencing in terms of destroying? Do you know who he was referring to? The Wheelers.
Okay.
Reference Farmer mentioning drugs. They who put her in there would know. In prison, asking who Farmer is saying destroy. Yes, the Wheelers. And here's the call. Okay, so I think it was weird as they were asking questions and then they played the call because the call says, "Hey sis, did you?" She says, "Yes, I did." Yeah, I did. Not something on the phone. The truth is the truth. That's why she was sick during the grand jury. I get it. I already figured it out. Like I couldn't hear anything about what he was saying because the call was so quiet, especially
Yeah.
on his end. So but what I got is I believe it's when they were talking about Kylie or Kylan not being able whoever wasn't able to testify on the grand jury because they were sick or for the grand jury.
Right.
He said, just like Jerry said, she's figured. So, and then this is when Farmer says, and this is the phone call. Just like Jerry said, she's figured it out. He said, I
Meaning
don't know.
Jerry.
Yes. He said, I don't know what. He said, she said, you think you got it figured out. And she says, I do. Yeah, that too. Doesn't matter if they have immunity. Get them on a lesser charge. Yes. And she says she's anxious to see his discovery. She said she had a 2 terabyte hard drive or maybe a flash drive. It's the most nonsense. And he said most of it's nonsense. And she said she would still like to see what people think. She says, I'm just curious.
Yeah, she wanted to know what people were saying and what the witnesses, what evidence they were giving and all that.
Yeah, and this is important too. I mean, just at a
Yep.
later time, it'll all make sense. And then I'm just curious, and it says, I think so, pretty sure so. Farmer says, okay, I feel better knowing. She says, I know you were too out of it. Why we were arguing. Why I kept saying you were out of it. It was while I gotcha. Figured that long time ago. Truth. And then Farmer says, we all know the truth. And she says, I know. Says, so we'll just have to wait and see. And it's all lies. Everything, it's perjury. People perjured themselves. Then they'll be exposed. Yep, it's all lies. They're just trying to get a deal. Highly hand. And it goes on to say, that's what's one's deposition. It says, oh, he says, what's deposition of Flint where him and the prosecutor go in? Where's your attorney then? I have no problem coming in and Mark McCann witness tampering is against the law. Farmer says something about a document. Tot states he needs to write down more because she remembers. Early on, this is early on. I'm not going to talk to her on the phone about it. We'll talk to her in person. Okay, so now we're back to questioning. Early on, you were talking about not going to talk to her on the phone about it. You'll talk to her in person. Was that Olivia? Did you talk to Olivia Farmer about receiving the letter? Talk to McCann about testifying at the grand jury? Who is B? Brad? Who is A? Alicia? And then they enter in exhibit number 69, the phone call between Flint and Tot.
Hmm.
It says, well, I've got 3 phone calls remains, and I wrote down Ashley, Blaine, Blake, everybody. One guy supposedly helped bury the body and they offered him immunity. He put her there, where she was. He says, how my brother left his house. How my brother, she left his house and in a white truck. And if he knows where, they talk about Kokomo in the know and a post that Jerry had posted saying that she wants her cremated, and they don't know how that she can have her cremated if there's an investigation still going on. And she said, I want to know that they're the ones involved. Farmer says, it sure wasn't me because I don't know where she was at. And then she says, well, Bubby, we'll see where it goes from here. Good or bad, good thing. Farmer says, I didn't murder anyone, Tot. And she says, I know. And the prosecutor then goes back and says, you stated, you know he didn't kill her, but you weren't there that night to see that. And she says, no. That she got into a white truck, and she says, no, I wasn't. And then we went on a break.
So, okay, just to stop you for a second.
Sure.
It really, really got to him that Brad and Alicia got immunity and he didn't. You hear that throughout the trial several times. Him complaining about the fact that they got immunity. So I just want to point that out to everybody. He was very salty about that.
And that's kind of what the end of this phone call was like. They're the ones that found her. I didn't know where she was. So we come back. This is remember we started, it's about 2 hours in. It's a little after 3. They show a copy of the transcripts, no objection to just playing the audio. It's another phone call between Flint and Tot. They ask her to read and describe the document, please. She says, what is that? It's the text between Flint and Tot. Is it accurate? She says, yes. They ask to approach. And then he says, when they come back, he says, Mr. Farmer wrote about a safe. She says, yes. And now they go to another phone call. Cases. And you said you wanted to talk about some scenarios. A plead for out of jail immunity. Let them step all over each other, We're close to the truth. Close, but not quite. Not telling the details, so you get in trouble. Says, I'm not innocent, of all this. Not of those charges. I know I wrote this terrible. It's hard. It breaks up when you're listening to it. It's quiet, but so it's Flint saying, they're close to the truth, close but not quite. He's talking about the Wheeler saying they're not telling the details, so you get in trouble. Says, I'm not innocent, in all this, but not of these charges. So. And then, I wrote down, she says, your house or theirs? He says, yeah, it happened at mine, but, and then he trails off and he says, I just woke up. And she says, you were out of it when it transpired? Yeah. Tried to pay him or push him to do stuff. I know. I got to be careful what I say. He says it was an accident. That's
It was
all.
an accident,
Yes.
but didn't elaborate on what was an accident.
Right. Tot says, hold on. She's getting gas, and then you hear her paying for a 32-ounce drink. And so that's why it's hard to hear. Like you
Yeah,
hear
you got all
all
the
the
background
background
noise.
noise and everything. She's giggling and she's back and she says, yeah, but so anyway, I'm sorry. I mean, I figured all along it was something like that because you were always under the influence and it was an accident. She says she figured so, like her. He says, it was an accident. And she says, I figured so, like her son. And he says, exactly.
Okay, so I just want to stop you there because there was just a post by Tot on the stuff that I was talking about at the beginning of the show stating that her son was murdered with a hot shot. But yet in these calls, she's saying that his death was an accident too.
Correct.
So that's quite interesting.
Correct. And as we all know in this true crime community, there's always a digital trail.
Yep.
Okay. Was taught and you're paying for it. And I don't understand why they aren't. Word on the street is they have immunity. And he can't deny or confirm it. So anyway, way it is, all the other stuff, don't understand why they did that and some things they were saying. And Tot says, yeah, like hi Lynn. They're talking about how she has Munchausen's, and how everyone knows she's a liar and gives two different stories. Yours only I didn't perjure. He says, yours only I didn't perjure. And she says, I didn't. I told the truth from the beginning all the way through. He says, you did. She said, how it is. Yeah. And he says, talking about shoot some scenarios at you. I was just shooting some scenarios at you. Shooting anything at you. Clarification. Okay, now we're back to questioning.
Yep.
He says, so what were you talking about? Shoot some scenarios at you, shooting anything at you for clarification. Where Flint Farmer or the Wheelers first time, was this the first time you were learning it was at Flint Farmer's house? Okay, so this is what I'm confused about too. He said, and so they're talking about the clarification of where this accident happened. Flint Farmers or the Wheelers?
Right.
Is this the first time you were learning this was at Farmer's house? She says yes. Were you surprised? No, she tried piecing together what happened. He's out of it. Karina came by, bought her some snacks, and she left in a white truck. This call said his house. He said, did you call law enforcement? She said, no, because I didn't know. He said, you weren't there? But you learned info that Karena McClerkin was and happened, but didn't call law enforcement. You reference or he referenced they got immunity. What was he referencing immunity for? And she said for burying the body. She assumed based off of word on the street. She learned in 2022 it happened at his apartment.
Right.
No other time. Assuming so, in reference to years earlier, wouldn't you find that important to tell the police? And she said she didn't think to. He said, hasn't Farmer always been your focus? And she said, yes, she is not going to lie about that. Through the course of the conversation mentioning the Wheelers, at this point, Karena McClerkin was missing. Were you concerned because she was missing all these years? She said she felt relieved when finding info. She said that she felt relieved. I believe that in referencing that she had been found, and when this immunity deal was going on, just everything she had heard on the street.
Okay.
Let's see. Let me go back here. Were you concerned because she was missing all these years? She said she felt relieved when finding info that it happened at Farmer's house. Did you find it important to contact police? You told about a truck. Why not tell new info that she was at his house? And she said, I honestly didn't think about it.
No.
And there's something between the lawyers, and they start jumping dates around. And then they bring in exhibit number 64 to review preliminary questions. Did you become aware of a wire intercept? She said, yes, July for 1 month, July 14th of 2022. There's no disputing that. That was Russia. And she said, no, she doesn't remember at all. He says, you indicated a month. How did you know? She said she knew afterwards. They said it was 1 month. So they lied. So basically, she just found out that they were recording her calls longer than 1 month, but she was aware that they were going to be placing a wiretap. She wasn't aware they were going to be placing a wiretap. She found out afterwards that
Right.
it was for a month. But now she is trying to say that they lied. It was longer than a month. But then the prosecutor says, hang on, I think you're jumping to conclusions. And then they publish a transcript, and it's a phone call. And here's the phone call. I knew they based shit off Kylan. I was saying this is Farmer. I was saying those were rumors. I kept the safe at the Wheelers. Tot came and wasn't at my house. It wasn't at my house and didn't keep there. She knew people would steal when I was passed out on my Xanax. I got it straightened out. She'll mess it up. She testified Karena McClerkin stopped by and I missed the name, brought her by. She stopped by Brad's house. Then everyone was hanging out. Joni stopped by to get that X. And then Joni was stopping by, so Karena just happened to walk with me when they were stopping by to get that.
Oh, right.
And he said, then Joni came back and said Karena was gone. He mentions trade that night. She came back and wanted money. No, she wanted snacks, and I had my food stamp card, and Joni came back and gave the money back. Because remember, Joni already testified that they went to Farmers, sold all of her Xanax, and then later went back. So this is the time frame he's referring to.
Mm-hmm.
Joni came back and gave the money back. He said, I heard Gabe Ellis picked her up on Washington. I'm Uncle Flint. I love her like one of my own kids. And Cott says, the family blames it on you. Kylan says not involved, so you shouldn't be there. He says, Go do your thing. She says, I'm here for you. Told you the indie lawyer's name and contact info. And I see now what they are all. Karena McClerkin's sister's a PI. She's a snitch. She's a dealer. The grandma works as a state police snitch. Martha. This is where he says something terrible that I hate even having to say this, but he said Karena hated Jerry. He says 20 years they're be put away, or 20. Oh, he's talking about, he says someone 20 years they were put away and they just got out and they're not looking into that. And I believe it was referencing one of her family members, and he says, I gotcha. It was a cross exam. They asked her how she was feeling, and she said overwhelmed. I'm not going to lie over any of this. You called about concerns over a podcast going on during the trial. Yes, you love your brother, Flint. Yes, willing to lie to everyone for him? No. Do you love Kylan the same? No, not at all. My brother is an addict. Your brother's an addict? Yes. Once an addict, always an addict? Yes. Did he have periods of sobriety? Yes. And mentioned being out of it. Which drugs? And she said he liked downers and Xannies prior when he lived with her. And she could tell when he lived with her when he was using. He asked about how Flint's mannerisms were. He was nice. He helped her with her kids. He helped around the house. And she could tell after he moved, he was actively using. Yes. And then she says, here's a funny story. It was 80 degrees outside and Flint come out in a long sleeve and flannels. And he came outside and he had a sandwich and he took one bite out of it and he passed out. And then he asks her, have you ever heard of Xanniwap? And he said, no, you're not. He lists her address and he states, I believe maybe where her husband 20 years, but she's retired. She worked at Chrysler for 20 years and she's been retired for 30.
Okay.
Then they start talking about Farmer's settlement and prior to, and him moving out next door to the Wheelers and asking how he found the place. Mentioned many times, she mentioned many times that she is concerned about him with the Wheelers or anyone else stealing off of him. She observed Flint passed out at her bar in the garage. He had a stash, his wallet, and he melted out of the bar stool onto the floor.
Wow.
She took his wallet and stash and she got rid of the stash. She made statements in October of 2016 through October of 2022 through now. In that 9 years, have you ever had to run people off? Yes. Flint mentioned getting the safe, and I thought it was a good idea. I told Detective Nielsen the safe should be kept at her house, and I begged him. And he finally relinquished, and I went and I picked it up. Or the defense is asking her, and she said yes.
Right.
I'm sorry, the prosecution. And then the prosecution is marking an exhibit, and he says, and I wrote down, which is the transcript, I believe, of Todd's interview with Detective Nielsen.
Okay.
And he says, do you recognize this? And it's November 1st of 2016. The statement to Detective Nielsen, yes, it is at the bottom. The bottom at Flint Farmer of 2016. Was it Farmer or Rubo? Okay, so he's asking her in 2016, was it Farmer or Rubo for her last name? Because in 2016, I believe that it's listed as Felicita Farmer. And then on other statements, it's Felicita Rubo as far
That
as
could
her
have
last
just been
name
a
goes.
typo or something, but yeah.
No, she clarifies it. She clarifies it later that there's a short period that her husband and her were married, they divorced, and then they remarried.
Oh, okay.
Do you recall saying you begged and begged prior to the date of November of 2016? And she says she doesn't recall. Before or after he moved in on Washington Street? When did you say it's best? His condition was a lethargic. Did Flint ever say, take it elsewhere or dispose of? She says no when there was an objection. They asked, did you take the safe to the garage? She says you took the safe to the garage and then the police came. Yes. And she said, look, I'll take you right to it. He asked, did you ever open it? She says no. And then there was something about a discrepancy. They withdrew the question. 9 years later, do you remember how long? No. Did you have access to it? No. The state played lots of conversations between Farmer and Tot. And then, yes, it wasn't played in chronological order. No. July, the grand jury statements come out. So they didn't play every conversation you had in 9 years. One thing that was consistent is that Farmer denies ever murdering Karena McClerkin, correct? Yes. He denies denies even was a murderer. Yes. His story changed over the years. She said yes, but never that he's killed her. Do you recall your deposition on November 14th of 2022? This is number 71, the phone call played. When you heard Farmer say, close but not quite, every version was different. Right after the deposition and Ms. Wheeler's statements. Farmer present for those depositions. Alicia came out crying. In the call, you hear Farmer say, not innocent in all this, but he said bad decisions made after that. He said there was not innocent in all this and bad decisions were made after that.
Okay.
The Wheelers were involved. I heard him say he just woke up and he's out of it. When it happened, then there was an objection. Repetitive. Nobody heard anything. Just an accident. Indicated same as son Blaine. Blaine died of an accidental overdose.
So they're basically just repeating questions again.
Yes. And
Okay.
then this is where Tot. I'm sorry, I gotta go back real quick. This is Tot saying nobody heard anything, just an accident. She indicated the same thing that happened to my son Blaine. Blaine died of an accidental overdose, and she broke down. She broke down crying.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's a redirect. So, you want me to take a break for a second?
Yeah, actually, we've been doing this 3.5 hours. So, how much more do you have to go with her?
Just a little bit. So
Okay.
I will kind of go through it a little bit faster. Um, and then at the end of this there was juror questions. So
Okay.
so I'll go ahead with the redirect. Indicated that he never changed his story except the one story in 9 years until he slightly changed it to him admitting it happened at his house.
Mm-hmm.
9 years ago, the city, family, the community, law enforcement were all involved in this case. We are aware of sightings of Karena McClerkin in Florida, etc. Objection. He said, so you understand there was a national search and aware for 6 years, and throughout the course of this time, does change in his story matter? He said possible. Possible to find possible. Found in the woods in Miami County. Fair? Yes. He said, what happened on October 11th? Says, I don't know. I agree. The rest of the world wants to know. Would you agree that Farmer is the center of this? She said, no. Do you agree now he is the center of it? Yes. So the story went from village pantry to got in a truck to it happened at his house. Is it an important change of story? She said, I didn't think about it at the time. Were you surprised the safe was at the Wheelers? And she said she doesn't remember. The letter Farmer wrote in reference to the Wheelers and their involvement. Yes. Is that fair? Yes. But not that he is the center. Fair. And then there was an objection. And they were able to ask, is Flint Farmer the center of the trial? And she said, he didn't admit involvement. Pointing at the Wheelers' objection, there was, like I said, it was kind of crazy.
Yeah.
In the letter, he failed to mention involvement. Fair? Yes. She said she's a little confused. Is it true it didn't come forward because you didn't want Flint in trouble? She said she never thought about it. She went on with her day and didn't think about it. She felt they were being recorded, and then they had to strike this. And then they said, when did you first hear anything about an overdose from Farmer? And she says, I don't know. They said before or after his arrest. She says she doesn't remember. What about falling over while eating? How long was he in that condition? And she said until the next morning sometimes, always long periods. They said he is in karate. Objection overruled. Yes. You indicated you wanted the safe was out of concern for Farmer, not others being in danger from Farmer.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was cross. You were concerned about the money and Farmer would be harmed and not him harming others. Yes. There's a redirect. Did you talk about Karena McClerkin always or often? Did you ever focus on that topic after the arrest? He denies anything about alleged murder until November of 2022. Are you shocked in any way with that conversation? And there's a redirect, a break, and Mr. Deckard asked numerous times, was Farmer denied involvement of alleged murders? So through the years, there's minor differences until the story, Karena was given a lift in a truck.
Mm-hmm.
The statement and characterizations, I know my brother and he wouldn't do it, even though he changed his story. I love him and I believe him. And now there's questions from the jury and the judge reviewed it. There's actually 4 questions. So the third and the fourth questions were not applicable to this witness. So the first juror question was, how did you know where the safe was located? Incoherent, and she said that Farmer was incoherent, and Farmer said it was at the Wheelers. The second question was, how do you know the money was kept in the safe if you had never seen it inside the safe? And she assumed, and that was the end of her testimony.
Okay, so the big thing to take away from that, besides what we already talked about, is that he admitted it was an accident and changed his story, and she did not feel that that needed to be reported to police. Even though she had reported everything else about the white truck coming and picking up Karena and everything else.
Yes, when he said to her, it was an accident, why didn't she go to police and
report that she found out that it happened at his house and it was an accident?
Yes.
Okay.
It's a lot, and I did my best to take notes. So thank you all for being patient with me.
Yeah. All right. So I think what we should do, since we've been on here over 3.5 hours, I know you have to go to work. Why don't we, if you're available, hang on. Okay. If you're available later tonight or even tomorrow afternoon, we can finish out Wednesday's testimony of Detective Rude.
Yes.
And then just do a general overcap and our final thoughts.
That sounds great.
Okay.
And we can just touch base in a couple hours, and I'll let you know which is going to work better for me.
Yeah.
It's been a long day already, so
I'm thinking tomorrow.
That sounds good to me as well.
I just want to say thank you to Bossy for taking these notes, being in the courtroom with me a majority of the days. Couldn't ask for a better friend to do that with. She cares about these cases and she's willing to help me in any way she can, and I really appreciate that.
Oh, no problem, Marv.
Yeah, like you said, we'll finish it up tomorrow and do our final thoughts and go from there. Just want to let everybody know I have been getting a lot of messages, comments under the videos, comments under posts that I made, emails, that type of stuff. I'm getting through them slowly but surely. So if you have not received a response back, be patient with me. I'm still doing and looking at everything. So with that, we're going to say thank you for watching and have a good Friday night, everyone. Thank you for those who have put Karena's picture out on Facebook and other social media. I was so happy to open that up and just see tons of pictures of her. Keep that going, and keep your love and support going to the families. So we will see you tomorrow to wrap things up.
Yeah, everyone have a great evening.
Bye.